Hello, Thaís Sky here. Welcome to Reclaim the Podcast. In this episode, we are going to explore the topic of envy. If you're new here, before I became a licensed psychotherapist, I was a depth-oriented coach for almost a decade. So I've taught and explored many ideas and concepts for how to navigate the kind of complexities of being human. And in this podcast, I hope to offer ways of thinking differently about popular concepts so that you can figure out what's going to be most supportive for you. And in every episode, I reclaim one topic. And today, I want to pick up where we left off a few weeks ago in my new series that I am calling Reclaiming What is Hard. Now, there are a lot of difficult parts of being human, and all of those things tend to revolve around feelings that arise within us that are hard to tolerate, right? Feelings that we have never really been taught to feel, feelings that we are told are bad, feelings that now, when they arise, can really overwhelm us and debilitate us and lead us to feel like there's something really terribly wrong with us. I want to break down some of these feelings in hopefully a digestible way that will give you some ideas of how we can think about these feelings a little bit differently so that maybe when they arise within you, you can bear it a little differently. You know, there's this famous Buddhist quote that says something like, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And I sometimes take that to mean that the hard stuff will inevitably come up during our time here on this planet, but what we make of it, how we relate to it, can make a huge difference. So that's what this series is all about. Expanding our capacity, expanding our ability to tolerate difficult experiences. Now, we've already talked about hatred and we've talked about anger. I will put those episodes in the show notes for you. Today, I want to talk about envy. I'm going to talk about envy and jealousy, but this episode is really about envy because, well, it's a really hard one to tolerate, right? And to feel and to explore. So that's what we're going to do today. But before we get into that topic, I have an exciting announcement to make. I have been working really hard behind the scenes to revamp an ebook that I wrote back, I think in 2017 or 2018 called Reclaiming What is Hard. As you can tell, I really like this idea of reclaiming. I really like this idea of taking concepts and ideas that maybe we have kind of decided we know what it is and reevaluating it. That is why my podcast is called Reclaim, and that is why this ebook is called Reclaiming Worth. For over a decade, I have been exploring and understanding this idea of worthiness. Why is it that some people, we feel like, take up this type of space in the world? They feel confident in themselves. They feel like what they have to offer and contribute to the world is valuable. And why do some of us really, really struggle with this? Why do some of us feel innately unworthy, undeserving, unvaluable? And what can we do about it? I labeled this kind of internal experience as the worthiness wound back before anyone else used the words, because I wanted to encapsulate this internal experience so that I could write about it and I could talk about it. And that's when I wrote Reclaiming Worth. Now, 7-8 years later, I have gone to grad school. I have shifted my focus. I have expanded my understanding of human psychology, and I decided it was time for me to revamp this book. So it's actually completely brand new. The internal ideas in this book, while the core is the same, I am totally revamping it, totally rewriting it. And it's going to be maybe about 20 to 30 pages of information for you to know more about the worthiness wound so that you can begin the process, if you haven't already, of tending and healing it. You can sign up. I'll put it on the show notes, but you can also go to my website, thaissky.com/worth to go to sign up. I'm hoping to release it mid-November, so stay tuned for that. But that is why I haven't released new podcast episodes in so long. I only have a limited number of hours in my week outside of doing work with my caseload, my individuals and my couples and my group, to provide content for the world. And so I had to make the hard decision of choosing between either my podcast or the ebook, and I really wanted to get this out in the world. Hopefully in the future, maybe I will publish a book. I have a lot to say on this topic, and I am finding that the more I write about it, the more I have things to say on it. So stay tuned, maybe a book at some point in the future. But for now, this ebook is going to be free. It's going to be available hopefully mid-November, but definitely at some point before the end of the year. Make sure to sign up, thaissky.com/worth, so that you can be on the list, so that you can get it when it is available. All right, so let's talk about envy. Now, envy is a difficult feeling for many of us to even admit that we have, because we often feel like it means that there's something really, really bad about us, wrong with us if we experience envy. It's a bad feeling, right? It's a feeling that, like, when we say, oh, I feel bad about it, that's one of the feelings that we may be describing there. And we can often internalize that it means that we aren't a good person. We are a bad person. We're a bad friend, we're a bad colleague if we experience envy towards our friend, towards our colleague, towards a family member. And as such, we often then experience a lot of shame and a lot of disgust with ourselves when it comes up. And because of that, we often then try to avoid feeling envy or even admitting that we have envy. We kind of try to keep it with, like, away, right? We do not want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. We claim, so many of us, I think, claim that we do not experience it. What are you talking about? I don't feel envy. I'm just now going to spend 30 minutes telling you about how stupid it is that that person got the promotion that I didn't even want anyway. It's a stupid promotion. It would have been all this work. And, like, they, yeah, they got it, but, like, I'm not experiencing any envy around it. Like, it's amazing at how we try to pretend like we're not experiencing envy, and yet we're finding ourselves doing things that, upon closer examination, tells us that maybe we are experiencing envy. And so I just want to start off this episode like I do the episode on anger and the episode on hatred. Like, envy is a very normal human feeling. It does not mean that you are a bad person because you are experiencing envy. It's so, I think, unfortunate to exist in a society that is so adamant in its communication to us that certain thoughts and feelings are really bad to have. It's really unfortunate because it doesn't make those thoughts and feelings go away. As much as we may even try to force them to go away, we may say to ourselves, it's bad, it's wrong, we shouldn't feel this way. It doesn't actually stop us from feeling this way. There's no amount of shoulding that makes feelings go away. And what it actually does is it kind of creates this internal conflict where now we're not even able to attend to the feeling we're not supposed to have. But we are caught in this shame, disgust cycle. And it's really, really unfortunate because what is underneath that conflict, the feeling that's bad, can actually provide a lot of really important information for us. So part of, I think, the series of Reclaiming What Is Hard is an invitation to maybe reevaluate how we relate to certain parts of ourselves, because when we start to see things that come up inside of us as something to be curious about, as something to get closer to, we start to befriend and tend to ourselves in a different way. And that can be all the difference. That can make all of the difference. Anyway, so just because you are trying not to feel envy, or you have been told that envy is a bad thing, you shouldn't feel it, it doesn't mean that you're not going to feel it. We all feel it. Envy is a perfectly normal human emotion. It is perfectly acceptable to experience envy. It is, let me say it again, because I feel like maybe you do not hear this enough in your life. Envy is a perfectly normal experience to have. It is completely acceptable to feel envious. You may feel envious at all sorts of things. You may feel envious that your sibling got something from your parents that you didn't get. You may feel envious at your friend for finally dating somebody that they're going to get married to, and you've been wanting to get married and you've been struggling in your dating life. You may feel envious that your colleague got a new job where they're going to get paid more and they're going to have more power in that organization, and it's something that you've been struggling with for years. It is perfectly normal to experience envy. It's really what we do with it and how we relate to it inside of ourselves and how we maybe communicate it externally that matters. But envy in and of itself is not a sign that there's something wrong with you, okay? So we all experience envy. We all experience envy. If someone says, I don't experience envy, they are lying. Either they're lying to you or they're lying to themselves. But it's just not true. Everyone experiences envy. So let's define it. Okay, before we kind of go much further, let's define envy. Google tells us that envy is a feeling of discontented or resentful longing aroused by someone else's possessions, qualities, or luck. Okay, so envy is a discontented or resentful longing aroused by someone else's possessions, qualities, or luck. Now, it's different than jealousy. And sometimes it feels like splitting hairs when we try to kind of parse out different words. But I think language really ultimately matters. I particularly like to think of jealousy and envy as two different categories. You get to decide if that feels right for you. Now, some people define jealousy as involving a fear of losing something we already have, whereas envy is the wish to possess something someone else has. I like to think of jealousy as something that somebody else has that I could then also get myself, whereas envy has a destructiveness, as an aggression to it, where I want to spoil it for somebody else. An example that I often give is that, let's say that somebody has a scarf that I really like. I'm walking down the street and I see that somebody has a scarf and I really like that scarf. Jealousy is like, oh, I really want that scarf. That's so cool that they have it. Look at their whole outfit. That is so rad that they can pull that off. Like, I feel really jealous. I don't feel like I can pull that off, but I'm going to go on Google. I'm going to look at the scarf. I'm going to ask them where they got their scarf. I'm going to buy that scarf and I'm going to try it. I'm going to see it. Right? So jealousy kind of points to things that we long and wish for ourselves, but then we have the kind of agency or the capacity or the capability to then let them have that scarf, let them be cool, let them be whatever, and then we can try to mimic it or we can try to create it in ourselves. Whereas envy says, you have that scarf, I hate that you have that scarf, and now I want to ruin that scarf. And so I'm going to find a way to spill something on that scarf, or I'm going to find a way to steal that scarf. I'm going to find a way to tell you that you actually look really shitty with that scarf. That's, I think, one of the things that we do so often is that we make these kind of undercutting remarks to people where we're trying to spoil something. Somebody just bought a house, and we want to buy a house. They bought a house, we go to that house, and then we just nitpick it. We just kind of find ways to be like, ew, I don't want this. I would never want this house. This house sucks. There may be envy there for us. And so if we think of jealousy as, regardless of the kind of actual definition of jealousy versus envy, if we just think of it at the core, that jealousy allows us to have some agency. Jealousy allows us to kind of create something with the feeling. Whereas envy, it's really about kind of destroying. It's about a separation, a removal of oneself from the possibility of getting in touch with the fact that we want it. And the focus more is on the aggression. And so destructive envy, right, like leads you to want to destroy what you can't have. It's as if to say, if I can't have it, then it must not be allowed to exist. And that can feel very, very hard to bear. That can feel really hard to tolerate. Maybe even just in the definition, we can appreciate and extend a little bit more compassion to ourselves and other people for why it can be really, really hard to experience envy and why we may be so adamant on kind of defending ourselves from the feelings of envy. It's really, really challenging. And it's also particularly challenging to be at the recipient end of it. We may want to have nice things because we want other people to see that we have something. Like we may want to kind of show off. It may be really cool, but being at the receptive end of envy can be really hard to tolerate. And we can then often internalize it as like it's something wrong with us, where it's just maybe the other person grappling with their envy. But there is ways in which when we defend ourselves against envy, when we have a hard time bearing the possibility that we may be envious, when it can be hard to expose ourselves to envy, it shows up in different ways. I like to think of our defenses as a way to protect ourselves from certain thoughts and feelings. But the problem with defenses is that usually something comes out of the cracks. Like our defenses aren't usually impermeable. Something kind of comes out. One of the ways in which it kind of comes out is aggression, righteousness, greed. These are all indicators that maybe envy exists. If we're feeling really aggressive towards somebody, if we're finding ourselves hating or attacking somebody and we're not kind of sure why they're evoking so many strong feelings within us, there may be envy there. Righteousness is a great one, because with righteousness, we're so adamant that we are right, that we are good, that we are on the right side of history, that this is the way we are, that we can then really effectively displace envy. It can be very easy for us to get so caught up in how right we are that we don't then even investigate why it feels so important to be right, and that the being right may be a way that we're trying to avoid the envy that maybe we are seeing in the other person. And then, of course, another a way in which I think it often shows up, especially those of us who grapple with people-pleasing or worthiness wound or perfectionistic tendencies, is we attack ourselves. So we're experiencing envy. I really want what they have. There's a lot of aggression. There's a lot of hatred, a lot of uncomfortable feelings that we are very ashamed to bear and experience, and so then we attack against the selves. We kind of go into like, I'm a terrible person for feeling this way. I'm a terrible person. I don't deserve life. I don't deserve to feel good. I don't deserve to be in connection with people because I feel this way. And so we kind of attack ourselves. And because this is a way that we're defending against these feelings, it doesn't actually eradicate the feelings, right? Attacking ourselves doesn't actually make feelings go away, as much as I think sometimes we really hope that it would. So what we're doing there, right, when we're attacking the self or when we're kind of stepping into like more aggression or greed, is that we're trying to transform envy into something that feels more tolerable. Because as difficult as it may be to experience a lot of shame or a lot of disgust or a lot of anger towards oneself, that may feel in some ways more tolerable, more acceptable, more within the realm of what is okay, than to feel envy. And so, kind of the invitation that I'm offering us at this juncture of the podcast is that a really important step, the first step, maybe, it's always, the internal landscape is always more complicated than steps, but an invitation is to begin to normalize maybe the experience of envy. Maybe start to play with it. Where may be right now, where may you find yourself being envious of people? I know it's hard. I know it's hard to even admit it. I think we've really, for so many of us, just internally, it means that we're like a bad friend. But you know what's worse, actually? What's worse is unaddressed envy. Because when we don't address the envy, that's when it actually has the capacity to really destroy and be very destructive. It can destroy our self-esteem. It can destroy our relationships. Unaddressed envy, unintegrated envy, right? Like envy that we're not integrating into our mind, that we're kind of keeping into the unconscious, out of our mind, kind of out of our awareness, actually has a tremendous amount of capacity for destruction. And so as much as it may be really, really hard to accept or to name or to tolerate, bringing that envy in, being more aware of where we may be envious, is a way that we're assuring that our relationships can can thrive or can succeed or can experience closeness. Envy is, in a way, a very destructive force. And when it is unconscious, that's when it can do the most damage. So an important step is to just be able to name that we are experiencing envy and being able to see if we can just be with that. Can we just be with that? Now, I think it can be helpful maybe to start to wonder about where envy comes from. Now, we can say that envy is a human emotion that we all experience. But I think it's like innate. There's like innateness to it. But why is it that for some of us, it can be really, really hard for us to bear it, for us to tolerate it? Melanie Klein, who's a psychoanalyst, did a lot of work around this idea of envy. And she believed that envy originated in infancy as a desire for the mother's breast, as a symbol of goodness and plenty. So let me break that down for a minute. So Melanie Klein did a lot of research into babies and spent a lot of time doing infant observation and was really trying to understand, how some of these things came alive within us. And she, in her research and in her understanding of babies, started to kind of play with this theory, with this idea that a baby sees mommy, and specifically breast mommy, sees the breast, like mommy's breast, as good, as nourishing, as something that offers the baby what the baby wants. So the breast is a symbol of goodness, of plenty, of depending on somebody and getting fed, right? Getting milk, getting sustenance. Envy for her was seen as like a natural but destructive response to perceiving another person, usually the mother or the caregiver, as having something desirable. The mom has the milk. The mom has the thing that the baby needs to survive. So in a way, the breast is the child's first experience of something outside of itself feeding the baby. This is all theory, and this will come together in a minute. Stick with me here. So she suggests, right, she theorized that then the breast becomes a symbol for all the good things, right? For nourishment, for love, for comfort, for security. And when the infant feels that the breast is available, that the breast is abundant, it experiences gratitude and love and comfort and security and nourishment. However, when frustrated, when baby does not get fed, whether it's because of hunger, whether the baby's feeling frustration because of like some sort of discomfort, or because the breast is absent, the infant may feel envy, perceiving that the breast, that the mother and the breast, the symbol of goodness, is withholding its goodness. And so this envy creates a destructive impulse where the infant unconsciously wishes to damage or spoil the breast. And that this wish stems from a desire to negate the breast's power to provide or withhold, which it hopes the baby, in doing so, hopes to reduce the feelings of dependency and the inadequacy that arises from needing something that isn't always available, doesn't always come. Are we following me? What I like about this theory, the reason why I'm presenting it and bringing it up, is it's just another way of thinking about what the human mind, how we were developed, how the human mind came to understand itself, how consciousness comes to kind of be at the seat of ourselves, and why at envy, while an innate and normal emotion, may start to feel like an intolerable human experience. So if we and then how we can tend to it, how we can begin to relate to envy in a way that isn't destroying the things that we want. And this theory, this idea, touches on this conclusion that envy is intertwined with gratitude, with internalized goodness, and with dependency. And those things then is instrumental in then how we now as adults try to relate to ourselves and our envy. And I'll get to more of that in just a minute. Okay, so mommy has breast, or even think bottle, right? Like it's symbolic. It's not really the breast. And it doesn't have to be mommy. It can be anybody. I'm using mommy because she uses mommy. I'm using breast because she uses breast. But we can see that it can be applicable in a more expansive way. Mommy caregiver has the thing that feeds the baby. What happens when the baby doesn't get the thing that feeds the baby? The baby is now suddenly in touch with a dependency, a need for something outside of itself for its own survival. Being with not getting it starts to stir up feelings of, you have it and you're withholding it from me. You're not giving it to me. There is a lack in me. You have the power to provide or to withhold this thing that I need. So of course, it's going to stir up all sorts of complicated feelings for us around dependency, around not getting and not having gotten. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But I'm providing, hopefully, the foundation for us to then think about how envy may be connected to grief and dependency, relationships, self-esteem, etc. So if we have unchecked envy as a baby, it can really interfere with the infant's ability to kind of develop healthy relationships in general, right? Because what envy does in some ways is it prevents the infant from internalizing the caregiver as a consistent good object, a good person, someone who provides security and love. And without this kind of stable internal representation, the good person, the good mommy is now inside of us. It's now, we are good. Mommy is good. Mommy is stable. Mommy is reliable. I am continually being related to in that light, and now that mommy is within me as a good, consistent other inside of me. So without this stable internal representation, the child may now struggle to integrate positive and negative, difficult, complicated feelings about other people, leading to kind of black and white thinking, leading to feeling very split about people. Some people are all good, some people are all bad. So envy as an infant is innate, is natural, is normal. And as the mom, caregiver, continues to relate to baby as providing and taking away, because that's inevitable. The frustrations is a natural, normal part of infant growth. We need to experience frustration in order to expand who we are and our understanding of ourselves. None of this is bad, mind you, okay? Frustrations is a part of the human experience, but it has to be tolerable. And if the baby experiences being provided to and then being taken away in a consistent, reliable other, the baby then starts to learn how to grapple with envy. But if that doesn't happen, if the mother is not attuned and consistently not providing, what happens? Maybe the baby starts to really have a difficult time with envy. So in Melanie Klein's theories, she really connects envy with gratitude. So gratitude, she argues, helps the child internalize the good aspects of the mother and forms a sense of trust in others, while envy, according to Melanie Klein, disrupts this process by turning feelings of admiration into resentment. And so she believes, that overcoming envy and fostering gratitude, which is not like the way that we see fostering gratitude through like self-help, pop psych ideas. But it was crucial to developing a stable, loving internal world. Because if you think about envy as we are lacking something that the other person gets, the other person has that we don't have, then we're essentially saying that there isn't a goodness inside of ourselves, that we're not deserving, that we're not good, that we're not lovable. And so gratitude, I think, my interpretation of this is, if I can remain grateful that I get stuff, that I'm good, that I'm important, that I'm worthwhile, that like there's something really good inside of me, then I'm less likely to be seduced by envy, to believe that envy is the end-all be-all, and to then allow that envy to destroy my relationships. I think what's frustrating about envy is that it often really shows up at inopportune times. when we're actually wanting to be happy for others, and instead we're consumed, right, with anger, annoyance, jealousy, and frustration that someone else has what we wish we had. Because of that, if we're not in touch with it, we may find ourselves, like I said before, kind of destroying the relationship, destroying the thing of the other person, avoiding the other person, all in attempts to kind of manage these really difficult feelings. And so, as difficult as it may be to experience, envy is a feeling that's very rich with emotion, with information. It's very rich with information about what we didn't get, about what we want to get, about what we should have gotten. And so in that way, envy offers us an opportunity to understand how our grief may have gotten calcified, unconsciously translating vulnerable feeling states to something righteous and something destructive. Because envy speaks to a lack. Envy speaks to something we did not get, a feeling now of not having. It's not really about the thing. If, let's say, our friend got into a relationship with a really great person and we're feeling very envious because we've been dating and we've been struggling to get into a relationship with a good person for us. If we knew on a deep level, on an embodied level, that we are deserving of someone good, that someone good will come into our lives in some way, shape, or form, that we are in position to receive something really good from the world. If we really felt that way, we probably wouldn't then want to destroy our friend's relationship. The reason why envy comes up in its most potent form, again, according to Melanie Klein, but also maybe logically, I think this makes sense, is because we don't actually believe that something good can happen to us. We don't actually believe in our own goodness. We don't actually believe that there is something worthwhile inside of us that we hope will eventually be gotten in the world, right? So again, envy tells us then what we didn't get, what we're now feeling, a lack. We're feeling some sort of lack inside. That's what envy tells us. Envy tells us like what we want to get, which is tied to jealousy, because jealousy does the same thing. Jealousy points to what we want. If we're feeling jealous about somebody else's dress, what we're saying is that we want that. Either we want the confidence that we're imagining that other person has, or wanting to be perceived in a certain way. Like there's something there around what we want. And I think where it gets destructive for envy is that we believe then we can't get what we want. We don't believe that we could ever feel that type of confidence that they do when they wear that dress. We just don't believe that that is something we can experience. And so if we can't experience it, the destructive desire is then the other person shouldn't get to experience that either. Yes? Okay. And so the ways in which envy points to what we didn't get, a lack of some kind, we are now invited to maybe think about the grief of never gotten, the grief of never getting, and the grief of never getting, of not getting and never getting. Which is, this is like a big topic in and of itself. And maybe I'll do a Reclaiming What Is Hard episode just on grief. But if we're thinking of envy as we didn't get, right? We didn't kind of get a sense that the things that we want or we are allowed to want, that there is a good thing out there that nurtures us. If envy arises because we don't experience something in ourselves as inherently good, then what we're also talking about then is a grief of not having gotten something that we should have gotten. Yeah? What we're speaking to is an emotional way in which we did not get something that we wanted and needed to get. And so now envy comes up as a calcification, as a hardening of a grief of not have gotten something we needed and wanted to get, and a grief of never have gotten it, of not getting it, and never getting it. Because what's really difficult about so much of what it means to heal, so much of what it means to integrate and to feel a sense of wholeness, is a grappling with the fact that like what we didn't get in childhood, we may now not ever be able to get as adults. And that's hard to face, that's hard to name, because there are ways that we could actually very much get things that we didn't get then, but we can't ever undo the past. We can't go back. At least the way that we experience time is in some ways very linear. We didn't get it then when we needed it, and now, even if we surround ourselves with the most amount of love and the most wonderful relationships, it's not going to ever fill the hole of something that happened then that we didn't get. It may come close or it may feel good, but there is inevitably a grief in what we didn't get. And envy points the way. Envy says there is something destructive that we want to do out here because it's much more bearable or much more tolerable to move towards an anger and a righteousness and a destructive and an aggressive, destructive force towards the external than it is to maybe face the vulnerable feeling states of never gotten and the vulnerable feeling states of dependency that inherent in the human condition is a dependency on other people. And when we experience dependency as something predictable and reliably good, we may not even know that we depend, like the dependency doesn't even maybe even come up in our minds as something to struggle against. We often struggle against dependency when we didn't get it, when we didn't get a healthy sense of feeling like we can depend on somebody, we can rely on somebody to feed us, to nurture us, to provide for us. And so now we may struggle with dependency as adults. We struggle with what it means to need other people. And this is where a lot of times self-sufficiency comes from. And envy speaks to this, right? When I feel really envious of somebody, my language of envy in my mind is, I don't need that. I don't want that. Fuck them for having that, but I also don't want it. I don't want a relationship. Being in a relationship is overrated, right? Like there's the destructive force of, I don't want that. I don't need that. And they shouldn't want it or need it either. That points to maybe an internalized way in which we have been told that to depend on other people is a really bad idea, that people aren't dependable. And this moves us into kind of thinking about healing then as like a relational experience rather than an individual experience. I had this really wonderful conversation with a few colleagues around how the Buddhist traditions of self-sufficiency makes sense coming out of Eastern cultures where there is so much of a loss of sense of self in the name of community, in the name of connection to other people, but that maybe for the West, the opposite is more like true, that we have a lot of individuated, I don't need anybody, I am my own self, I'm autonomous, I don't need people. That tends to be more of what we see in Western culture, an overemphasis on self-actualization, at the cost of community, at the cost of other people. And so that maybe it makes sense that in the kind of the Buddhist tradition of learning how to be in a self is really important coming out of those cultures. But maybe a Western tradition, the invitation is actually to step into more community, relational healing, seeing how we are actually formed from a kaleidoscope of the ways in which we were interacted with. And that the answer to so much of our frustrations and our envy and our destructive forces is actually in working through in relationships, not working through individually by ourselves, which is, I think, why I often struggle with self-help. But anyway, okay, so if we're looking at pointer, if we see that we're devaluing other people, if we see that something that we suddenly wanted now looks terrible when the other person has the thing, right? And all it's kind of pointing to envy. And when envy appears, maybe we can get curious, right? Maybe we can try to understand it more deeply. Maybe we can attempt to face our aggression and our hatred more openly. Maybe we can create space to address the grief that is begging for our attention. And maybe envy is also showing us what we lack and what we now want to get and what we feel like we are not deserving to get. And also maybe envy and jealousy too is a sign that we don't actually know the other person that well. Because when we are experiencing envy or jealousy for another person, we tend to envision that they're just having this all good experience. Like the person with the scarf or the dress, that they're super confident. We're imagining, we're projecting that they're super confident in their outfit. And that if we had that dress, or if we had that scarf, or if, we had something of what they're doing, then we would also feel confident. But then maybe we strike up a conversation with them and we start to see that they're actually not very confident in themselves at all, or that they were actually very much doubting their outfit, or that they have a very complicated relationship with the scarf because a family member gave them the scarf and they don't really know how they feel about the family member, but they felt bad and they had to wear it. Like once they start to get to know the person's story, the person's internal experience, I think some of these feelings start to feel a little less powerful, because we're starting to see, actually, getting that thing, being now in the relationship, getting that promotion isn't the end all be all. It's just part of what happens, right? That there's so many other feelings that maybe they're having about that promotion, about that dress. And so there's also ways in which, as hard as envy and jealousy can be to experience, because it wants us to separate, it wants us to move away. What if we saw it as an opportunity to get closer? What if we saw it as something for us to get curious about, not only in ourselves, but also in the other person? And then maybe we could experience our envy a little bit differently. We manage envy by working on building more goodness inside of ourselves. That's, really the invitation where envy exists in us is the opportunity to build more goodness inside of ourselves. Because when we are so endlessly kind of fascinated by our own hearts and minds, when we see ourselves as something that, as a human being worthy of layers and complexities and all these kind of good and interesting thoughts and feeling, like when we see ourselves as someone worth being curious about, we tend to then find other people less interesting. And again, I think that this is where I really can appreciate Melanie Klein's theory about why do we have a hard time feeling good in ourselves? Well, maybe because we lacked the experiences of internalizing a good other. And when we lack that experience of internalizing a good other through the symbolic experience of the good breast, Melanie Klein and her breasts, when we can see that maybe the lacking of feeling good inside of us is a relational deficiency stemming out of a childhood where we didn't get what we needed by having a reliable good other feed us and provide the adequate amount of frustrations in order for us to start to see the other person as an other person as opposed to just a part of ourselves. And then we start to kind of feel like there is an other person and we are good because we've been related to as good. Like if we're missing that whole thing, it makes sense why we don't see ourselves with a fascination or a curiosity. But the healing work is to engage in that. And when we do, we will find maybe that envy is less destructive. We will find that maybe we're able to tolerate envy as something to be curious about instead of something to push people away at or to destroy. If you're not aware of experiencing envy, you're probably destroying. If you're not consciously aware, if you're not in your mind noticing where envy may come up, it is not that you don't have envy. It's that it is destroying the things that you are on another level not wanting to destroy, that you are wanting to foster intimate friendships, that you're wanting to have good collegial relationships. And so if you're not in touch with feelings of envy, it's not that you are inherently better than other people. It's that it's unconscious. And it's, whatever is unconscious may be destructive. And so the opportunity is to spend more time with it. Spend more time looking at, thinking about, feeling into where you're wanting to destroy. And the more we talk about it with our therapist, the more we talk about it as we journal, the more we talk about it, the less likely it will get acted out. Yeah. I tend to find, I want to do a final note here on the worthiness wound because Remember, I'm writing an ebook. It's a free ebook called Reclaiming Worth. Did you sign up for it? The link is in the show notes, thaissky.com/worth. So as I've been innately curious about this idea of the worthiness wound, I've been then thinking about its relationship with envy. And I think that this is something that I would write in my larger book. It's not going to be in this guide because I have to kind of limit it somewhere. But if we look at the worthiness wound, as a kind of deficit, inadequacy, right? Or a too muchness, which both speak to a feeling of there's a deficiency in us. Why are we not able to properly assess the muchness and the containers of other people's minds? It does lead us, usually, the worthiness wound, to an oversensitivity to others and to comparing ourselves to others. Often, and this I will talk about in my ebook, the worthiness wound is speaks to an inability to really know who we are. And because we're kind of lacking this sense of self, we then find ourselves looking for it in other people. And so it kind of lends itself to a comparison, trying to find ourselves in others, that type of comparison. And so as we're kind of comparing ourselves to others, looking at what others are doing, it can then easily get envy stirred up. So people who really struggle with worthiness wound in some ways are, I think, more susceptible to envy. And the destructive force of envy, the righteousness or the greed, can actually be a way that we try to then coalesce our sense of self. Because if I can feel really righteous about something, then I certainly know where I stand in that something. So there's a way in which righteousness is a coalescence of self, as an extension of a deficit, of like maybe a worthiness wound deficit. So it makes sense that when we are feeling always inadequate, always not enough, or always too much, or always like there's something wrong with us, we imagine that others are enough. We imagine that other people aren't struggling this way. It's a really interesting projection that we really have a hard time imagining that other people could feel any way, shape, or form the way that we are feeling. We really, really project that other people are whole and that we are the only ones that are broken. And because we're comparing ourselves, we're looking at other people so intimately. The worthiness one is a relational deficit, stems out of relationships. I'll talk more about that in the ebook. If you have no idea what I mean, go check out the ebook. It orients us so deeply into the minds of other people. People with worthiness wounds tend to be very much aware of how other people think and feel, but in a very unimaginative way, where we tend to think that they feel all good and we are feeling all bad. There's that split that Melanie Klein was talking about. Black and white thinking, all good, all bad. I am all bad. I am inadequate. I'm not good. There's a deficit in me. There's something wrong with me. Everybody else is feeling all good. And so, of course, then when we compare ourselves to these all good people, what are we going to experience but a tremendous amount of envy? What the fuck? Why do they get to feel all good and we don't? What's wrong with us? We attack ourselves. What's wrong with us for feeling so bad and everyone feeling so good? There's that attacking a self as a way to avoid the feeling of envy. The other way that we then navigate envy is by being very angry at people, being very righteous at people, being very greedy. I want more, I want more, I want more. Nothing is ever good enough. And so it makes sense that people with worthiness wounds tend to grapple with envy or be more susceptible to feelings of envy. And attempts to use envy, I think, in some ways to find oneself. And so if we can kind of slow that process down, if we can spend a little bit more time thinking more deeply about envy and how it may be showing up, then we are starting to relate to ourselves differently, as maybe not a deficiency, but as a grieving. Maybe as not a lack of self, but a grief of not gotten and never getting. And when we can separate that a little bit more, then we can start to allow more good in. We really want to be so compassionate and so understanding of ourselves when we experience something as difficult as envy. And a really important point here is that the best ways for us to start to work with envy is to not bring it to the relationships that is eliciting that envy, at least not at the onset, because envy is destructive. And if we don't have a firm grasp on what's really going on, it's likely to kind of spew out. And so kind of finding ways to explore it, talk about it in other relationships, like with your therapist, journaling it kind of in your, intimate partnership or in a friendship that can really hold it, so that you can make enough sense of it. So then you can talk about it with the person who is eliciting it, could be helpful. And talking about it with the person that is eliciting it is a way that we're not falling into the trap of envy, which is this kind of separate destructive force, but using envy as an opportunity to invite in a closeness and an intimacy. Okay, I think that's it on envy. I hope that was clear. I felt sometimes that maybe some of the things I was talking about is a little unclear. So I want to hear from you. Let me know what you think. You're welcome to reach out to me on Instagram or comment here below. There's a lot of concepts here that I try to kind of put together. I hope I did that adequately enough. I will be continuing the Reclaiming What Is Hard series, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, I'm going to be really focusing on this book, and hopefully I hope to get back to a normal cadence with the podcast. But thank you for your patience with me as I get this book out there in the world. You're more than welcome to reach out to me if you have any questions. You can go on Instagram. You can email me at info@thaissky.com. I always love hearing from all of you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I've gotten some really amazing comments on my YouTube channel. It's been really fun, slowly kind of growing that platform. So if you're there, if you're following me on there, thank you. Welcome. Hi. And if you're a listener of the podcast, whether this is your first episode or you've been a long time listener, I'm always grateful for you. Thank you so much for being here, and I will catch you next time.